9 years since they stopped producing, we've got more people in our R&D team than we've ever had. We used to say about 40% of what you pay for you can't see when we build a vehicle. It's probably more like 70 or 80% now. And it's not a very good car. You know, if you're on a mode of transport, you don't buy a Defender.
Charles Fawcett.
The man behind Twisted Automotive, from his Yorkshire upbringing to founding one of the most respected Defender specialists in the world. Charles takes us through his passions, challenges and the vision that helped shape Twisted into the iconic brand it is today.
This is a really fascinating story and one you need to hear. Welcome back to Rest Revival. I'm your host Will. Let's get into it. Charles, thank you for joining me today. Normally in interviews we sit in front of the car you own. This is a slightly different episode. Can you sort of just take us back to where it all started? Because I know you grew up on a farm, you were raised pretty much in a 4x4 of various kinds. So yeah, tell us how that love started.
Do you know what? I can't tell you where it began, other than from, I guess, my first memory, there was a car somewhere within it. And that period, so I was born in 78, and that period, you know, I guess I'd be 3-ish maybe, the first thing I remembered, somewhere in there. The 80s for cars was phenomenal. British cars generally were awful, they fell apart. The Italian stuff did the same. But every single one had a character. Every single one was ultimately analog. And I think that period compared to now created many people with passion for automotive, just because, you know, manufacturing was not what it is now. You know, there was a lot of people involved in making things, and therefore you could line 3 or 4 of the same thing up and they'd all be a little bit different. They'd need different amounts of choke and different amounts of throttle, and, you know, just to start the things up. And I think I was really fortunate that my family were involved in vehicles. My father was a motor dealer, and where, you know, some car garages will sell thousands of Fiestas, for example, my father, much like me, didn't subscribe to normal kind of stuff, you know. And if there's an auction and there's 10 Fiestas and one, I don't know, Fiesta Turbo or a quirky 4x4, he'd buy that, because I think he felt it was far easier to find a customer for something different than find 10 customers for something relatively normal. Yeah. So I grew up around weird and wonderful vehicles, some by chance, some intentionally. When Mum was pregnant, her daily vehicle was a Series 2 109 Land Rover. No power steering, safari roof. That's what she drove around in. Dad would have, you know, 3-door Range Rovers of the time, or G-Wagon, or, you know, just weird and wonderful stuff. And, you know, as I grew up, it was Isuzu Troopers, Daihatsu 4-Tracks, Mitsubishi Shoguns, you know, later down the line, Daihatsu Sport Tracks and Suzuki Vitaras and SJ410s and SJ413s and Land Cruisers. Every single one totally analog, simple, functional. And actually some of the design, some of the styling, you know, you think back to the Troopers, maybe less so Trooper, more so Shoguns and Land Cruisers of the day. You know, they'd have a flash of red and orange down the side in the stripe, and, you know, advertised the fact that they were a turbo and more latterly a turbo intercooler, and I just think it was an amazing time to be surrounded by vehicles. And from about, I don't know, 8 years old, I remember Dad came home one night, and yes, we lived in a farmhouse. We rented this farmhouse within a working farm. And he got home, and I'd been changing gear for him for years, and always fascinated by driving. And he came home in a Suzuki Super Carry. In fact, no, it might have been a Daihatsu Hijet, but the little sooty pickup, the little 55 wide Japanese pickup. You sat on top of the front axle, the engine's in the centre between the seats. And he said to me, he says, when I finish my tea, son, or whatever he called me, yeah, you need to be driving that. And he just left me there with the keys. Well, I sat in this thing, and I'm like, well, I know how this works, and I know what the key does, but putting it all together wasn't necessarily something I was able to do. And he finished his tea, came outside, and we went for a drive. And I just couldn't stop driving after that. Every spare moment, I wanted to be behind the wheel of something. And he'd often come home on a night in a different car, and we had this little track up the side of the field, which we probably weren't supposed to drive on, but the farmer lived somewhere else and didn't really know. And I remember saying, Dad, can I go up the field in the Saab? Dad, can I go up the field in the Daihatsu? And just whatever he came home in. And we used to trade. So long as I washed it, I could go up the field in it. So I probably, by the time I was 12 or 14, I'd driven hundreds and hundreds of different vehicles. And just loved them all for different reasons. Had a few scrapes and a few bumps and ripped the odd door off and did stupid stuff, but it was just a great way to grow up, I got my first Land Rover. It was a Series 2 109 pickup. I think I was about 11. We went to Panel Motor Auctions. Now, you won't be familiar with it, but Panel on the side of Harrogate there was a really scruffy motor auctions. And on a Tuesday night, they used to have a banger sale. And it was just all the crap people wanted rid of. And there was no extraction back then. You stood in an auction hall and you choked on blue smoke, and the banger auction was the worst for that. And anyway, there's this Series 3 109 pickup, and somewhere along the line, I think Dad lent me £111 to buy it, and we took it home, and it had a misfire, and I used it for months in the fields with a misfire. And then one night it's like, come on, let's get this blooming thing fixed. So we're under the bonnet and we're finding the source of the misfire, and it was just brilliant to be able to be around these things. I feel very, very fortunate. There's certainly no silver spoon. There's no, big pot of inheritance or anything, but I did better than that because I learnt life skills. I was pretty crap at school. I couldn't be bothered. I just wanted to drive things. I think all my school reports said must try harder. But I guess having seen and experienced all of these brilliant cars over the years, and some really terrible ones as well, Yugos, Astavias, and Skoda Rapids or whatever they were back then, it just got the juices flowing. One of my pals, when I was 10 or something, would come round on a night, and we'd draw racetracks and draw off-road buggies and jeeps that raced around the tracks. And there was no computers, there was no phones. I remember we would have probably a phone in the hall downstairs, and the cable was 3 meters long, and you didn't dare make any calls because your parents could hear. So you were just creative, and I was either inside drawing pictures of cars, or I was outside messing around in the fields. So long-winded, but that's sort of the backstory, really. And as soon as I could leave school, I did. Worked for my dad, driving up and down the country, picking things up, dropping things off. I was about 18. I started working in the family business which was an off-road driving centre. So we would teach people to drive Land Rovers, police, fire brigades, utility companies and private individuals. And they'd come along wanting to learn how these things worked. And, you know, I was probably way too young and probably too unskilled, but I was quite practical. And we had a great group of instructors that I worked with, and I learned a huge amount. And we would transfer some of these skills to people that wanted to learn about it. And in other cases, it was just an experience, an off-road driving experience where, you know, you just show people what the vehicle could do and have some fun. So Land Rover has just been part of my life. I ran the off-road school for about 10 years, during which time we were actually doing a little bit of off-road competition. So what they would call back in the day challenge events. Before they were using buggies and, you know, portal axles and all that stuff, it was you know, Land Rovers and a few Japanese 4x4s. And I remember we had a couple of 90 Land Rovers. In fact, one was a Defender, one was a 90. A 19J turbo diesel 90, a G plate, and I think it might have been a 97R or something, 300 TDI Defender. Defender, yeah. And we went off and did a competition up in Scotland, and we literally threw some tools under the seat, made sure we had a winch on each vehicle, and made sure the tyres were brand new. And the event was absolutely phenomenal. It was over 3 days with a night section, and we somehow managed to win the damn thing. It was amazing. Just 4 practical lads in 2 nice, light, practical vehicles with amazing tyres. Anyway, the following year we went off to do the same competition again, and we were defending our title, as it were. It wasn't quite that glamorous, but we had, at that point, I think we'd upgraded to TD5s, and there was a need for power. So we sourced a few bits to make these TD5s a bit more perky. And I guess that was the start of Twisted, really, for me. Met a guy down in Essex. He'd been developing some tuning parts for Land Rovers. Worked with him for a short while, and then continued on my own as Twisted. And I found it to be far more rewarding than the off-road business. So my father continued with the off-road business, and I put all my eggs in the Twisted basket and got a little unit in Thirsk. In fact, operated out of my garage at home before that, and started selling tuning parts for Land Rovers. And we would develop a few and sell a few and develop a few more and sell a few more, and people thought we were mad. Why do you want to make a Land Rover go faster? It doesn't make sense. It's a farm vehicle, you know. But actually, the quirkiness and the sort of abstract nature back at that point, you know, we're talking early mid-2000s, you know, it kind of didn't make sense. It was a bit twisted, you know. Why do I do that? But the vehicle, like all those ones I drove as a kid, every Defender is different. Every Land Rover off the line until production ended was unique. We would, for the off-road centre, we'd buy 2 new vehicles every couple of years, and there'd always be a good one and a bad one, even though they were identical, you know. I remember we used to use these ex-Camel Trophy 110s back in the 90s for the tuition business, and one went like a rocket, the other one was slow as a slug, and it would almost be a race in the morning for the instructors to get the quick one. I think the flawed nature, and intentionally flawed, like, you know, Defender it was never designed to be something other than a workhorse, really. Land Rover in latter years tried to make it a bit more Chelsea tractor, but ultimately it's a work truck, you know, and the flawed nature therefore allows for such a huge degree of improvement And even now, 2025, 9 years since they stopped producing, we've got more people in our R&D team than we've ever had. We're developing more component for Land Rover than ever. Some of it's through necessity because parts are out of production, but a lot of it is still looking for little improvements. And to think where Twisted as a business and where the product has come from and where it is now, it's absolutely phenomenal that there is so much passion for this vehicle out there. And ultimately that's all it is. Nobody needs this. There's no purpose for this. There's just a huge amount of want and desire. And while there's the want and the desire, we'll keep doing what we're doing,
Yeah, so in terms of, my next question was going to be about why the Defender. It seems like over time, it was more sort of an osmosis. The more you spent time in them, the more you sort of...
It's the one vehicle I've spent the most time in, and it's the one vehicle I understand the most. I love cars. I love anything with an engine. Even on a weekend when I'm jobbing around at home, every single job I find to do, there is an engine involved. Oh, I'll just go and move that. Oh, I better get the digger. Oh, I'll just move that. Oh, I'll go and get the... There's always an engine. I don't like manual labour. So Defender is just the vehicle that I feel I understand. And as a result, it's the one I think I can extract the most pleasure from. And that's all it is. I'm no engineer, I'm no mechanic, I'm no anything. I just have a passion for something, and I still get excited by it. I was out in that Indus Silver soft top yesterday, and the guys have just refined the gearbox map. Just an absolute buzz for me that the team have come up with something that's made it even better. And for most people, it's probably good enough how it was. And I've got to say, when we started as Twisted, back, I don't know, in the early 2000s, we were very much embroiled in the Land Rover scene. And much like the vehicle itself, there was a mentality that something was good enough. It'll do. Oh yeah, that's near enough. Good enough for farm work. There's all these sayings. But I kind of didn't subscribe to that. So even, we look at some of the parts we fit, you might look and say, well, that's just I don't know, I'll use the example of the NAS rear step. Well, that's just a Land Rover part. Well, it is, but it's then been filled with wax oil and powder coated, and all the bolts have been swapped, and there's plastic caps on all the nuts and blah, blah, blah. It's not just an off the shelf, and there is almost nothing now we use that we buy and use as standard how we've bought it. There's always a change. And, we used to say about 40% of what you pay for you can't see when we build a vehicle. It's probably more like 70 or 80% now. And again, to a lot of people, those things are totally unnecessary. People say, why do you want to be bothered making the door shut properly? Well, we just do. It's just got to be right.
Yeah, because I've always found that fascinating. There's a sort of dichotomy between the sort of notion that when these were built, it was always that'll do, good enough. And then you've gone the other end, where it's an absolute obsession to fix everything, whether you can see it or not. Where do you think that comes from?
I don't know where it comes from. It's probably OCD or ADHD or something. I'm probably on some scale or other, on multiple scales, but...
Yeah, I think you fiddling with the lace probably.
Yeah, the issue we have is it is never good enough. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to surround myself with people who think the same. Frustrating at times.
I can imagine.
But actually, it isn't ever good enough. You have to chase being the best you can be, producing the best you can produce. And over the years, we've produced some things that aren't very good, or have got issues. But the big benefit, because of the type of business we are and the people we are, the customers therefore that we work with, they get it and they work with us to make it better. You know, I've often used the example of the bumper with the lights in. That was Bernard Heaton in 2009. He said, "Charles, can you put me some lights in my bumper?" "Of course I can, Bernard. What do you want?" "Well, I've seen these little, whatever they are, LEDs. Can you just cut a hole and put them in?" That's what I can do. And we did that for Bernard, and every single car thereafter that we built had these lights in the bumper. It would be very rare that one didn't.
Yeah.
And it was just Bernard saying, "I think it looked quite good." And we've probably redesigned that bumper 50 times since. And in fact, only last week I had a meeting with one of my R&D guys, Tom, and he said, "I've come up with an idea. We're going to put a gusset in there and slip the light that way 10 mil and to make this bit better." All right, fine, And it's just a bumper.
Yeah.
And, in fact, the first one we did for Bernard, we cut a fairly rudimentary hole in there that was roughly the size of the light, and then I got a guy down the road to laser cut 2 stainless covers with the profile of the light exactly on the inside of the cover, and the outside of the cover, the radius was to match the radius on the edge of the bumper. You wouldn't know it, and we stuck this thing on, and it looked mint. But, I don't know, 5 months later, the back of the bumper had rusted and the plate popped off. We're like, right, okay, we'll have to change this, And you just go on a journey, and it's fun. It really is.
Yeah, you spend 5 minutes in the old cinema here, and you feel the passion. You speak to anyone here, you feel that passion. It's really...
We're probably all on the same scale.
Yeah.
But you have to be.
On the one hand, it is just a car. But on the other end of the spectrum...
And it's not a very good car. If you want a mode of transport, you don't buy a Defender. You've got to be a certain way to want to drive one.
Yeah.
And then, nth degree to actually go to town on one. But the pleasure, the buzz, the adrenaline you get from having created this, and I guess as an owner, to be able to drive it out of here, it's just something special. It's not art, but it's an extension of the individual. It's a passion, complete passion.
Do you think many of your current customers, or how many of them, do you think drove original Defenders?
I think probably a fair share. Or there's some attachment to the brand or the product. And it could be, I've heard people say, "Oh, my uncle had one and we used to go to the beach in it," or, "My granddad used to take me shooting in one," or "There was a chap down the road and he used to drag trees out with one," and I just think they're amazing. There's always a reason.
Yeah.
The reason isn't necessarily direct, but there's always a reason.
Yeah.
If ever anyone buys one and doesn't keep it very long, it's because they haven't the attachment.
Yeah.
They just think it's going to be cool.
Yeah.
And actually we do our best not to sell to people that think it's cool. And in fact, my brand director's told me I'm not allowed to use the word cool. He said, "Cool doesn't exist." Okay, fine. There's an attachment, and therefore it becomes just part of the journey.
Yeah, I suppose that was the essence of my question, is whether people wanted a new, quote-unquote, cool Defender, or they loved the old Defender, thought it was shit, but wanted a more improved one.
I think if we were to dissect our customer base, the lion's share of our customers buy them because of an attachment. And I think there are lots of other businesses that supply the other market that want something that is trendy, because it has become quite trendy. And actually, to a degree, I don't like that. I'd rather it was a little bit more under the radar. And at some point, all these other companies will get bored and, buy bits to bolt onto some other thing that's cool. There's nobody doing what we do. There's some great companies out there, some interesting companies. But there's no one doing this for the same reason or with the same amount of passion. or with the same commitment. I think that's fair to say. Forgive me, I keep looking over there and I can't help but notice there's something not quite straight. I need to go and sort it out. But
I think that probably illustrates quite nicely where the business is at now, because it's that attention to detail. So what are the plans for the future for Twisted?
Automotive just continues to evolve. The US is a big opportunity for us just now. Within 3 years, I want to be manufacturing in the US rather than restoring in the US. So we're going through the process just now of registering as a manufacturer. I want to build a Twisted. That would probably close off the circle for me.
Yeah.
From drawing them as a kid, I've always had this passion to actually create something of my own. I want a legacy. I want that legacy to be something exceptional, phenomenal, and something that makes me smile when I'm sat in my rocking chair on my veranda when I'm an old guy, if I get that far. So for me, within the business, keep evolving, but with an eye on developing something that we can call a Twisted. Range Rover, I'm so excited about. For me, Range Rover's it's really close to my heart because it's one of the first cars I remember.
Yeah.
Little stainless clip to flick the ashtray open in the centre, and the bloody great big long gear lever, and the tailgate. There's just things about classic Range Rover that get me excited, and we've been 3 years working on our first one, and it's a car that'll stay with me and around the business forever.
Yeah.
Bahama Gold. We've hand rolled on this particular one. We've hand rolled the arches to flick them so that we can put a bigger wheel and tyre on, just like Dad did back in 1982. Changed the front valance, made it a little bit meatier, based again on a. Dad put this MGB GT front spoiler actually on his Range Rover and cut it in the middle, made it bigger, and it looks so cool. I've got this picture of this car, and I was like, I need to remake that. And we've taken it to one little event. We've not promoted it at all. There's been a few pictures on our social. No press, no PR, nothing. I think we're on our 6th or 7th order just now. And we still don't know what it's going to cost nor when anyone can have it. It is going to be expensive. The labour in a Range Rover is insane.
Yes.
But comforting that we've got people that are saying, you know what, I'll have one of them, you know. So constant evolution of the product, continue to push the boundaries of what can be done with Defender, while having an eye on creating the Twisted, but never walking away from this.
Yeah.
Because this is where it all began, and
Yeah. The North Star.
it'll always stay.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. I could easily sit here all day and listen to you.
I think you get bored at some point.
Doubt it. But no, thank you for your time.